Trams are important parts of robust public transport systems in the vast majority of big European cities, especially in Central Europe, but they can also be found in many American, Asian, or Australian cities. And they are often mentioned as seeing a comeback after decades of neglect. Trams fill that very important role between buses on one side and metros or heavy trains on the other. Plus, there is the big eco-benefit of electric propulsion. But were trams always seen as this great mode of city transportation? What were the opinions on trams in Central European, formerly communist cities, and how were the tram systems expanded in the last 40 years? Did they actually make a comeback like in many Western cities? Let's take a look at that, while in our city of Altengrad, we will build the first tram network expansion after many decades. It will of course have the appropriate wilder architecture of the early 2000s, highly customized stations and networks. Let's go. So, did trams make a comeback in Central Europe? Well, no, not really, because they were already here in very large numbers over very extensive networks. So the situation is vastly different compared to, for example, the Americas, where people often mention a tram or light rail renaissance, since a lot of cities opened or reopened their systems relatively recently, since roughly the 1980s. Similarly, Western Europe, France, Spain, Britain, West Germany opened many new systems, more in the 90s but mostly 2000s. Tram situation in Central Europe, and especially the former communist Europe, is a classic example of something that survived, some worldwide trend, because countries could not really follow that trend fast enough before it changed again. The worldwide modernist visions for cities after the Second World War did not favor trams at all. Trams were seen as old, they needed to go to make way for big urban avenues for the modern tire vehicles, personal cars and buses, trolleybuses somewhere. Very high capacity was to be taken care of by a vertically separated metro or urban trains. That was the popular trend. Central European cities were in a sort of middle position in that regard. Central Europe is like that to this very day. On one hand, kind of rich, but on the other hand, missing a lot of infrastructure compared to the big metropolises. With trams, it was exactly like that. Central Europe, just like the West, was filled with tram networks after the Second World War, but only Budapest had a single metro line, the oldest in continental Europe, and now communist East Berlin inherited a very limited metro system. The countries and cities were also not quite rich, and the population did not have cars. It had drastically lower car ownership compared to the West, so getting rid of trams was totally out of the question. However, cities like London, Paris, and many American cities already got rid of trams in the 30s and finished the job in the 50s. London was constantly digging new metro tunnels immediately after the war. West Berlin got back to work on new tunnels since the 50s and removed all trams by the 60s. This pretty fast development just did not happen in the communist countries. A great example is that Berlin Divide, when East Berlin more or less continued with the infrastructure it already had. Warsaw, Poland is also a great showcase of the visions on one hand, but huge financial struggles on the other hand. Warsaw did remove a lot of tram tracks from the city center in favor of a metro system. However, the metro system was not there. It would be first opened in 1995, so complete tram removal just could not happen for practical reasons. Prague or Budapest had grand visions for many metro lines going into all corners, all new and old districts, but those plans were pure utopia that could never be paid. So trams had to continue doing their jobs, because buses could not keep up alone. The entire world started to realize that trams do have their place in cities. The United States and Canada started opening a lot of so-called light rail systems since the very late 70s, more in the 80s, with a couple of streetcar systems as well. Western Europe did the same. Communist Europe, therefore, did not need to reopen anything. The shifting trends simply caught it when it was just attempting to catch up with the previous trend, so plenty of tram networks were still operational. On the contrary, network extensions were done here and there all the time because centrally commanded construction meant huge new residential projects for lots of people, and trams, regardless of urban planning trends, were the only option for transportation, as people also did not really have cars still. In the 1980s, it was then fully accepted that extensive metro systems are just not happening, just like the modernist utopian living. Perhaps it's not a coincidence that it also went hand in hand with the start of postmodern city planning. So, in other words, we might also call it realistic city planning of sorts. But 1980s were also a time period of big financial problems of communist Europe. The capital cities also still painfully tried to catch up with the metro construction. 1990s were not exactly better in that regard, as public finances were in ruin, although the ongoing project continued, as we talked about it with the metros. So the tram renaissance, as the Westerners call it, from the 80s was, just like any other trend, again and again, very slow to get into Central Europe. Although, unlike many Western cities, here Central Europe had a massive head start, even though it did not exactly plan it that way. Reunified Berlin could benefit from the massive East Berlin's trams, so the network slowly started to spill over to the west, mostly from the late 90s and 2000s, although we can still clearly see today where the Berlin Wall went when looking at the network map. The other East German cities heavily invested in new rolling stock and track maintenance. Networks in many cities were significantly extended, although East Germany faced that massive population decline, which even influenced the public transport planning. The city of Leipzig, for example, paradoxically in this supposed Renaissance time period, is closing down tram lines, although Leipzig already started to gain population back, so this development might be a little short-sighted. Warsaw has around 130 kilometers of tram tracks. In that are some 9 kilometers added in the 90s and 2000s, with numerous but short segments added since. Warsaw then mostly focused on bringing the existing system into the 21st century, which means new vehicles and lots of repairs, which only points to the more broad economic problems of the past and the difficulty of getting over them still. The real boom of trams is scheduled to happen around now. Plans include expansions in the recent years of 30 kilometers. Some plans even call for 70 kilometers, so that's a lot. Interestingly, in 2005, the very first track section on a grass median was opened, which was also a track partially financed by the European funds, which will be very important for all infrastructure projects around here since entering the European Union. We can also see that these tracks more resemble the sort of light rail systems, which in case of Warsaw was allowed by the generous space of these huge avenues, even in the post-war rebuilt city center. This will be the trend from now on, also because new tram extensions are mostly happening in the open, in the outskirts, so it is desirable to build them into fast systems. Unlike North America, Central Europe nowadays heavily employs hybrid systems, sort of combination of streetcars and light rail, to borrow the local terminology. It means trams will move fast in the outskirts, disconnected from roads, but they arrive into the city on normal streets, sometimes even on historical streets, historical tracks, 100 years old. Germans are even combining actual railways and streetcars, but perhaps we will talk about that some other time. Interesting tram network is in southern Poland. It is an interurban system connecting many towns and cities from this very dense metropolitan area. It is a very old system dating back to 1894, although that is not really unusual because most European tram systems are from this era. The system was gradually dismantled since the 70s in favor of intercity buses. 90s and 2000s did not really change much, and more closures happened in later 2000s. Since then, the situation more or less stabilized, also due to the European funds. The network was even expanded a little, but most importantly it was modernized because it was in terrible conditions. The network has 178 kilometers of tracks. Its future is uncertain, as ridership is not very high and buses are economically very favorable. In one article, some officials stated that the system might perhaps just be a 100-year-old remnant, not fitting current times. Maybe, maybe not. Still, it's not exactly a typical example of a tram renaissance project, only showing that it's complicated outside the largest cities, and exactly, unlike those 100 years ago, trams much more shifted towards that high-capacity, dense urban solution where they can shine and where they can be paid for. The system, once again, could be called a streetcar light rail hybrid. It's rare to see trams like this in the open, between towns, between municipalities, but it is a thing around Europe in other networks here and there. Some tracks just look exactly like normal railways with open top. Anyways, I think you get the idea. Tram renaissance is a thing that is frequently mentioned for the Western world, and in practice it is happening there from already the late 70s, more the 80s, with light rails in America, but also proper trams or streetcars in many corners of the world too, more from the end of the century. Central Europe around that time had plenty of work in tram networks, but they were in various conditions, worse than better in many cases, so focus had to go towards fixes first. Extensions were still happening, little by little, depending on the city, but I guess tram renaissance is a strong word to describe the 90s and 2000s around here. Stabilization, perhaps, might be more accurate, and renaissance or even boom, again, depending on the city, would have to wait for actually the 2020s, it seems. What about architecture around the tram project? In the vast majority of cases, new stops, stations, accessories, the architecture is purely utilitarian, following the engineering or some norms, standardized elements for railings, fences, curbs, poles, and that's it. But there is one project in particular that does something totally different, and that served as the main inspiration of what I'm building here in the city. It is the Barrandov tram extension in Prague, opened in 2003. A Barrandov housing estate was finished in the early 90s as the last Prague's concrete panel district, and a tram line was planned right into it from the beginning, so this is yet another one of those infrastructure debts from the past, finally paid a decade later. The entrance to the district is rough. There are steep and tall cliffs around, so just like the previously built urban highway in here, the tram would need to climb up on a viaduct. Inside the district, it was then decided to make the tram into a proper light rail, even going underground between stops. So overall, just because of that, it's a very expensive and difficult project. The main architect for it was chosen to be the same person responsible for that very bold architecture of the metro station that I showed you in some previous episode. So while the project was already going to be expensive, well, might as well turn it into a proper 2000s technical architecture piece. The first stop before the climb is not even that crazy, although it's certainly not a usual tram shelter. Very typical for this time period is the use of metal, polished metal, complicated elements and such. In a way, it's a very similar style to, for example, the London's Millennium Bridge and similar recent projects. The viaduct then is not just an ordinary bridge, but a very futuristic looking structure. This is now a total switch from the older concrete bridge designs, which were more following the sort of brutalist shapes and decorations, if you can call it that. Also, do notice the custom catenaries. The next stop is fairly simple. It's similar to the previous one, but still quite unique and obviously still quite complicated. It has different color, which is like a theme for this entire extension. But so far, it's nothing all that crazy, right? Well, brace yourselves, because this is the next one. I don't think I need to say much more about it. You can see what it has from these pictures. I'm just going to show you more of these pictures and pictures of the rest of the extension. And in the meantime, I want to touch on a couple of topics that this tram extension, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, opens. First of all, this project is largely controversial. Plenty of Czech architects criticize it and the author for simply being way over the top for what these projects are. This is a tram stop, and like I said before, it is a very rare exception as far as tram stops go, because most of them, or even bigger stations, are architecturally not anything really, because they just follow the utilitarian engineering. I have heard opinions that that's exactly how it should be, because you just go there, wait for your vehicle, and move on. But on the other hand, people largely do appreciate, for example, those old historical train stations or the decorated walls of Prague's metro and various artistic sculptures there and so on. So it does make sense to make stops and stations interesting. And this got me thinking not only whether or not these tram stops are justified and if I like them subjectively, but what is it exactly that I value in a city? And does this project fit with those values? I know, it's a much deeper topic than just some stupid tram stop, but like I said, it kind of surprisingly opens it, so hear me out. I think in the end, I value variety in the city, and that is actually something that can be crazy perfectly illustrated by a tram line that just so happens to go through here, the line 20. By the way, if you ever visit Prague, now that I think of it, just board the line 20. It actually starts next to the airport and go to the other end. You will see practically a complete showcase of everything Prague is. It nowadays starts in a very recently built corporate-looking residential district by a highway ring. It then continues through an 80s small prefab area with new tracks making it look like some West German outskirts. It then joins a median on a huge avenue full of architecture from the 30s to 80s with some recent buildings. On this avenue, you eventually reach an early 20th century planned city district with a monumental square. Next, you have the St. Vitus Cathedral right in front of you, together with the old Baroque city walls. You will see those walls some more later with fancy villas. Then you climb down into the historical lesser town, Prague's castle on your right above you, river soon to the left. Then, through the lesser town, you ride through the very unique single-track segment through a building into the lesser town square, which is the tourist point of the city. After leaving lesser town, you end up in one of the many late 19th, early 20th century districts with the typical blockhouses found all over Central Europe. You will pass a modernist bunker bank, a nice brick church, and quickly find yourself in a huge commercial center of Prague with shared pedestrian tram streets and big mall. There is then a path through Prague's quickly redeveloping, very rough former industrial neighborhood, huge brown fields with little islands of luxury apartment blocks, new cubist bridge under construction on your left soon, little chapel on a cliff, lots of railways, lots of highways, big valley in front of you, cliffs, and you have finally reached this Barrandov tram extension and this crazy postmodern early 2000s architecture inside a 90s panel housing district on top of a beautiful cliffside with amazing views back into the city. If that's not city variety, then I don't know what is. Would I prefer that entire hour and a half ride to be some historical medieval street, or only modernist, golden 60s or crazy postmodernism? Absolutely not. I think you can now see why I don't dislike these stations then. If these were just sidewalks with a sad tram stop sign, I would probably not even remember them, so I do agree with the author of these, despite the criticism, that these projects should form something interesting, something, well, he uses the word monumental. I'm not really sure I'd go for that word, but, I kind of agree with the idea. I'm an engineer, so a bias towards technical or infrastructural architecture is there. Yes, obviously these stations are crazy. If they lost some of the elements, it would probably be absolutely fine, if not much better. But in the end, they are part of the district's fabric of the view, and for some reason I accept that with this particular project. And I guess that is also my view of architecture in a city in general. I don't necessarily need to strongly like or dislike projects. Interestingly, I have completely different opinion about some other projects by this architect. I have different opinion about some other public transport stations. With some, I totally agree on the utilitarian nature of them. It's just all very individual, which is perfectly alright. That's how it should be, in my opinion. Well, anyways, enough of that. Let's now talk about the technical issues with these structures, because here the criticism is absolutely valid. Are these projects too expensive for what they are? Maybe, but like I said, some money should be spent on making things more than just the engineering function. After all, it's a place where a lot of people go every day, a lot of people see it every day. How much more can be spent on decorations? Well, that's debatable. Maintenance and repairs. Let's face it, this suspended roof, once the cables and beams start to rust through, no one is going to repair it, not in the Czech Republic. So, in some 20 to 30 years, this roof will be gone, without replacement, most likely the white bridge too. The entire project already shows that it is 20 years old and no one touched it since. No one will touch it. No one is going to climb all the beams and structures to power wash it, sand away the rust, and give it a fresh coat of paint. Not to mention that a lot of details are simply unreachable, even if people wanted to. So from this point of view, the project is a failure. I actually generally hate these overly complex metal structures. Yes, very nice engineering, congratulations for calculating all of it right, removing dead weight and planning it exactly to fit the loads, all nice, but it literally cannot be repaired or even cleaned. Although I really do like the entrance portals into these tunnels. They have this unusual organic shapes and they are made of some durable laminate covers that look as good as new, without complicated details, so even if they do get dirty, someone can easily just power wash it every once in a while. Well, anyways, this last bit was just a food for thought about architecture, I guess. We can expand on some of the topics with the following episodes, but now let's focus on where these new tram tracks go down here in Altengrad, where are the stations, and how it benefits the city and how I built all of that. But before that, I need to give you guys an important channel update just to get it out of the way. I need to postpone making videos for this channel. For one simple reason, I don't have the time. This video, I'm making it on the 19th, so 2 days before it goes live, and it basically took me 4 weeks to put together. Not really because it was that difficult or lengthy, but simply because I just don't have the time to put into the game, into the channel. If you are watching the live streams on Twitch, then you know that I was basically only building for it, and for the past couple of months I've only been building on the streams, so practically opening City Skylines once every week. I literally don't have time elsewhere in the week. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. There are just so many different things that I need to do right now, work related and just life related. I don't really want to, I'm going to be brutally honest. I don't really want to sit in front of the computer anymore all the time. So that also plays a role in that. So, the result is that I'm just not going to keep up making videos, simple as that. There's no way there would be a video ready in the next 2 weeks, and 2 weeks after that, again and again, following the schedule. There's just no way I'm going to maintain that these days. It's very frustrating because there are so many plans. We have been doing so much planning on the live streams too. Railways, highways, refurbishing of old places, trams. We have been planning those quite a lot, actually. By the way, that's the reason why this tram loop has that little stub there, because it's going to continue past this place in the distant future. But yeah, these kinds of plans will just have to wait. I'm not going to give you any estimate when things are gonna go back to normal because, maybe they won't, maybe they will, maybe, I don't know. I don't know anything at this point, That's adult life for you, I guess. I can hardly plan my normal life, so I'm not going to even attempt planning city skylines and the internet life, So yeah, that's it. Now let's try to focus on what I'm building down over here. So when I planned some sort of tram expansions for the 2000s, I immediately knew that I need to be inspired by the Barrandov tram extension in Prague because it's just so crazy and Altengrad just needs something crazy like this. What's really great about this project in particular also is that we are finally reaching those like futuristic projects, the futuristic times. So I can finally use my knowledge of these sorts of techniques and projects from my futuristic series. And we are, slowly getting there. I suppose this might be fueling the conspiracy theories that As Tourists is actually Altengrad in the future. Well, anyways, so these, by the way, I really wanted to do much crazier tram stops than what I'm building in here because I really wanted to put together those suspended roofs from that Prague station. But I was trying that. I was trying that, for example, with like a sand pile because it's already that sort of shape a little. So, turning it into procedural objects, but it just didn't really work. So I finally settled on this like a tunnel for this blue station, for the red station in that half a circle. I just built something similar to those initial stations at that Prague example. So, the inspiration is there, but it's not as crazy because it would just be so difficult to put it together. This was already really difficult, especially the red station took so much time to do because as you could have seen, I had to change an actual bridge, turn it upside down because it had that sort of arch reversed shape that I really wanted to. So yeah, that was just crazy. That probably took the entire stream actually. So in the end, I used the color coding for the stations. This first station, that's just basically the same station as this loop. Now, by the way, I turned this loop into not exactly the greatest place in the city. There are a couple of tents for the homeless there. There are some police cars, seeing what's going on. And it's just not a very great area, neighborhood overall, because this is an industrial place. And as we have been saying in the previous episodes, focusing on that, industry is not doing so well. The original industry is not doing so well in Central Europe. So this place, yeah, that's also been planned to be completely reworked, heavily inspired by real life and just, an opportunity to talk about these sorts of refurbishments and reconstructions in real life and the problems attached to those. Now, this place where the extension enters this new district, first built in the 50s, this is where the craziness starts. So first with the catenaries, I just used the letter O and made these catenaries as we could have seen them in real life. And the first station is nothing all that super extraordinary, but this one now is. So I had to completely rework the road, as you can see, because I really wanted to fit like a long platform, theoretically for two trams, behind each other. But I had to move that road, otherwise it would not fit. So the station obviously needs to be in a bend. By the way, right from the beginning, when I was doing this half circle building, I knew that there needs to be a tram going through that portal because it just screamed that it needed that. Yeah, I really wanted to do some sort of a tram ride through it. But when I was building this place for the first time, I realized it might be a good opportunity for like a modern edition of trams. So that's why I didn't do it back then and only ended the trams at the industrial zone. So now finally we reached the time when it's appropriate to do the extension. And obviously this architecture doesn't fit at all with the neighboring buildings. But then again, does it need to fit? Like in real life, the prefabs and these metal structures are not exactly similar. So the contrast is definitely there. This is the end station for now with the tram loop. Yeah, like I said, I wanted to do it crazier, but eventually I did it like this. Those sculptures there on the side is just adding something more interesting. Procedural objects, most heavily used in this place, of course, and intersection marking tools for the surface, which is a really convenient technique to do these sorts of weird shapes if you are exactly like enclosing them within the networks, because then you can use the networks to use intersection marking tools. So that's actually super easy. So it's not really the longest tram edition. As you can see, there are some, how many? 4 new stops? Well, technically 3, I suppose, because that one is part of the original loop, but that's exactly how it was in real life. As you could have seen, as I told you with Warsaw, for example, it has some 130 kilometers and some, units of kilometers were added in the past couple of decades. So that only shows how Central Europe already had so vast tram networks already in place. And these days we are just like branching them out into the outskirts, extending them into the outskirts as cities grow. Although here in the 2000s and these earlier decades, we are mostly like paying those infrastructure debts. just like with that project in Prague, and just like with many other tram infrastructure projects in different cities all around Europe, not just Central. Anyways, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you for watching it. Please do all the things below the video. You know the drill, so I'm not going to repeat it. Huge thanks to channel members, and I will hopefully see you in some next videos at some time. Take care. Goodbye.